Jamie, and I am on the island of Curacao in the southern Caribbean. It's amazing to have so many classes with us, and there's a special shout out to Swallow class, and they're at Beechwood Primary Academy. Hi everyone at Swallow class. And we also have a shout out to years 4, 5 and 6 at Glytha Primary School in Newport, South Wales, who've been doing an amazing job learning all about the coral reef and also climate change and how that is affecting this amazing environment. Fantastic work by all those students there. Now, today's lesson is all about helping coral reefs, and it's my great delight to welcome Susan, who is at the California Academy of Sciences, all the way over that. She's got up really, really early to speak to you all about helping coral reefs. Good morning, Susan. How are you?
Hey, Jamie. It's great to see you virtually. Yeah, it's dark here. It's really early, but I am so excited to join you all today to explore one of my favorite ecosystems, coral reefs.
Susan, I know we're going to come together to talk through some of the students and classes' amazing questions a bit later, but you've got a fantastic presentation and lesson for all those students watching and classes watching. So over to you, and look forward to connecting in just a bit.
Sounds good, Jamie. Talk to you soon. So welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to join you all. I'm actually in my home in California, which for those of you who don't know, it's on the far, far west side of the United States. And on the screen, you'll see the California Academy of Sciences, and that's where I am so fortunate to be able to work. And it's actually a museum. And you can see it has some special features. There are 2 domes there. One dome is a planetarium where you can see stars and you can see planets. And the other dome, sort of on the right there, is where you can go and observe butterflies and birds in an indoor rainforest. But beneath all of that, there's an aquarium where, you guessed it, we have fish, we have coral, and all of our water-loving friends. But there's even something more unusual and special about this museum, and that's that there's hundreds of scientists that actually work there. And that's what we're going to explore a little bit today. We have a couple of questions we're going to think about throughout the program. One is, how do California Academy scientists study coral reefs to understand how to protect them? And then also a very important question, what can we all do to help? So let's get started. So I'm going to play a video, and as I play it, I'd like you to think, how does it make you feel? So let's just take a look. Thank you. So how does it make you feel? Let's do this. Think of one word that kind of fits how it made you feel, and share that word with somebody nearby. Could be a classmate, it could be a family member, or if no one's there, you can just say it to the screen. That's fine too. So I wonder how many of you felt the same as the person you shared with. For me, when I look at this video, it made me feel kind of calm. So I want to tell you, this is actually a video from inside our aquarium at the California Academy. It's certainly beautiful, but it's actually a model of a place called the Philippine Coral Reef, where our academy scientists do a lot of diving and research. It's out in the wild, out in nature. This, what you just looked at, is not the real Philippines, but it's made to look as much like one as possible in our aquarium. So this is a model, but that really makes me want to think more about the coral reefs in the real world. So let's take a look at this map, and we can see where coral reefs are in the real world. Every single one of those green dots is a coral reef, so there are a lot of them. How do scientists even figure out where to spend their time? It turns out our California Academy scientists decided to focus on Curacao, which is actually where Jamie was sitting there. And that's near South America. And another place that our Academy scientists focus on is the Philippines, which is where we had, where the video came from. And we chose those two places for a couple of reasons. Both of those spots have a huge amount of biodiversity. That means there's animals and plants that live there, and in many cases, nowhere else. Also, Academy scientists have really gotten to know the people that live in both of those places. And they believe that together with the people that live there, they can really work to protect those coral ecosystems. And these coral ecosystems are in need of some protection right now. So I've been doing a bit of talking, but we would really love to hear from you. So I'd like you to take a moment to think about this question. And if you like, you can enter your answer with using the directions on the side of the photo. Why is it important to collaborate with people that live there? Why do you think why is that so important? You can either enter your answer, or if you want, just think about it. So while you're thinking about that question, I'd like to show you some photos. I have a few photos from the Philippines. Now, I have never been to the Philippines, but you can see what it looks like from these photos. There's mountains, there's water. There are many, many islands. So the Philippines is a country, and it is, you'd call it an island country, I think, because there are over 7,000 islands in the Philippines. And of course, there are coral reefs. So here's a photo. I think it's somebody snorkeling, looking down from the top of the water at coral. And then we have another photo of people diving underneath the water to look at coral. And of course, scientists, like the Cal Academy scientists, love to study coral there. Okay, so let's go back to that question. Why collaborate with people that live there? Why is it so important to work with them? So many of you shared that the community of people that live there really know the place. And absolutely, that's so true. While our scientists from California might teach about coral science, it's the people that live there that can teach our scientists what they know about the oceans and ecosystems in their backyard, where they have spent their entire lives. So also, some of you pointed out that many voices through collaboration can really do more to help coral than just a single voice, than say just a single scientist from California. And that makes so much sense to me. So when our scientists came back from the Philippines for the first time, they were so excited. They were like really excited about what they had seen, and they wanted to share it with the rest of us, with all the museum goers. And this turned into a very, very big project. So I have a little bit of a guessing game here. I'd like you to take a look at this photo and think about what's going on here. What is that a photo of? And there's another photo here. I'll give you a hint. This is related to the first photo. What do you think is happening? So go ahead and think for a moment. If you want, you can turn and talk to your neighbor. So this is a photo of the giant Philippine coral reef aquarium being built at our museum. And the lower photograph with all the gray in it, those are the building blocks of the original coral reef tank being built at the California Academy. And that other picture, that is the giant window that is being lowered by a crane to be put in front of the aquarium that people will look through. And this was a huge, huge job to get that giant piece of glass, right? It's a giant window down through the crane into the museum without having it crash and break. So that was quite a job. And once we had the window in place, we could add water. We added a diver, but what's missing? What's missing in this photo? You can go ahead and shout out to the screen. What's missing? Yeah, fish, right? There's no fish there. There's no coral, and there's like no color either. So once we added all that, this is what it looked like. And there you can see that giant window in front. And let's just take a moment. We can't actually go to the Philippines today, and we're not actually in Curacao, but we can take a look at this model of the Philippine coral reef at the California Academy. So that was a giant model of a reef. We also have smaller models, and that giant model is something you could see if you went and visited the California Academy. But today I want to show you some other areas at the museum that you don't normally get to see. We call it behind the scenes. And this is where our scientists, remember I told you there were hundreds of scientists that work at the museum? So this is where they work. And I'd like to introduce you to scientist Pim, who has his own small model of a coral reef in his laboratory. And what he does is he studies coral behavior. And when he first told me he studies coral behavior, I was like, yeah, right, Pim. Coral behaves. I mean, I don't think of coral as having behaviors, but actually they do. And they're just kind of slow usually. So what Pim did was he developed a method of looking at coral using time-lapse photography. And there you can see him in the lab, sort of practicing with time-lapse photography. And later, once he had it all worked out in the lab, he went out in the field and used time-lapse photography to study how fast coral are growing in the wild. And he could figure out which areas are not growing well and which need protection. So he shared with me a particularly cool video, a time-lapse video that I would like to share with you. And time-lapse just means you're looking at something that normally might take, say, days in just a matter of minutes. So let's look at this video. And it shows, here's one of the things he learned. It shows that coral reefs sometimes get crowded. Some little areas sometimes get crowded, and coral actually try to make room for themselves. So let's take a look at these two coral. And they're actually fighting each other. See if you see a mouth on the one on the right as we watch this. The one on the left is sort of waving its tentacles, trying to sting the one on the right. And the one on the right, see that green sort of thing that's coming out every once in a while? That's its mouth. And that's not all. Out of its mouth, there's coming like a stringy thing, sort of gooey. That's its guts and its stomach that are coming out of its mouth and trying to digest, trying to eat the coral on the left. So anyway, I wanted to share that because I thought that was pretty amazing coral behavior. So that's not all that scientist Pim and his team are up to. They're also using another type of photography, and that's called 3D photography. And what they're doing, they go to Curacao and they keep track of the health of 20,000 different individual corals. And so every 6 months, they go down and look at the exact same corals and see how they're doing, which is pretty amazing. And to me, sounded really difficult when I first heard about it, because how do you find the exact same coral that you look at today? How do you find that again 6 months from now? And so Pim gave me a video. Maybe we can try to figure that out. And look, let's take a look at this video and see how they might track where exactly corals are today and then 6 months from now. So it's a real quick video. We'll take a look. See what you see. There's Pim with his 3D camera. Maybe that's a clue. Yeah. So I saw a line there, which maybe is to kind of keep track of where in the coral reef they want to be photographing. And I also saw a number. And Pim told me that number is actually called a cattle tag. And why do you think it's called a cattle tag? Well, it's because that's often how ranchers keep track of their cows, with a little tag in their ear. And scientists keep track of corals with tags. Cows and corals, something in common. So there's another way that scientists can keep track of individual coral, and that involves this beautiful animal. That's right, this is another animal. This is a sponge, and it's called the orange elephant ear sponge. Can you figure out why it might be called that? Looks pretty appropriately named. So it's definitely the brightest thing down there, and it can be used as a marker. And scientists actually measure where their corals are from that marker. And that also helps keep track of individual corals. So when the scientists come back up, when they're done with their dives, they load all that 3D footage, all those photographs onto the computer. And then people all around the world can look at the exact same coral reef, the exact same corals as scientist Pim and his team did. So I went to my computer and looked at some of the photography that Pim and his scientists had loaded up. I'm far, far, far from Curacao, and I don't have fancy cameras or fancy computers, but look at what I could, I'd like to share with you what I saw. So here is the video. Yeah, so look at all those shapes. I wonder, all those individual corals, I mean, I wonder if you can see the orange sponge. Keep an eye open. Do you see the orange sponge? I don't see it yet. Yell out if you see it though. It's pretty amazing number. There's the orange sponge. It's the exact one that Pim saw when he did his dive. And there you can also see that line. It's called the transect line. And it helps scientists keep track of where they are and what they want to photograph. Pretty amazing. So we saw a little bit about how scientists study coral reefs so that they can protect them. But if we want to help, and we do, we need to know a little bit about coral. And so just maybe as a review for some of you, this is a photograph of some coral. Each one of these individual, what looks like a flower or a star, is an individual animal named a coral polyp. And you can see that together, there are lots of animals here, lots of polyps in what is called a colony. And if you have lots of colonies together, that's called a reef. And here's a diagram. You can see the orange part is the coral polyp body. It's a soft body. And the coral polyp animal actually makes its own skeleton. It makes its own bones on the outside of its body. And that's what this grayish brown material is around the polyp. It's hard, it's its skeleton. And then on top there, you can see the little tentacles and also the mouth. So if you're lucky enough, maybe if you walk along a beach where there are live corals out to sea, you might find a coral skeleton that's washed up on the beach. And it might look something like this. And we at the California Academy have so many specimens of non-living material. And here are some examples of coral skeletons that we have collected. So Pim and his scientists did a lot of photography, fancy photography to observe living coral. Sketching is another way that scientists observe and record what they see. And that works really well for coral skeletons. So I'd like you to take this opportunity to get your pencil and paper out, your science notebook, if you have that, some sort of pencil and paper, and we're going to have the opportunity, or maybe little slides coming down from the top of the coral. So you draw in the shapes that you see, and then you start to add some details. So you can add lines. Like there, I have added some lines. And then you can also start to add some labels. So for example, I wrote that, and this is actually the most important part about scientific sketching. So I added the color. I wrote it was off-white. I made some remarks about the texture. It felt kind of rough. And then it's good to say what it reminded you of. So I wrote down, it reminded me of a slide. And the idea is you write down, you draw the things that will help you remember what that specimen looked like. So let's go ahead and pick one of these 4 corals, and we'll give you a little bit of time to do a scientific sketch of one of those 4 corals. I think we'll give you about 4 minutes, and I will go off camera, off on mute, while you go ahead and do your scientific sketch. See you in a few minutes.
minutes remaining, 2 minutes left. Remaining, that's 1 minute left.
Okay, everybody, let's have you come back in 3, 2, 1. So everybody put your pencils away. And if you want to, sometimes it's hard to finish everything in 4 minutes, but I'm sure you can work on that a little bit more later. So I wish I could see your sketches. Why don't you go ahead and show it to, maybe there's somebody else in the room. Hold up your sketches and show them. Thank you so much for doing that great sketching work. I'd like to share a little more information with you about what corals need to survive. And this is where what we can do to help really starts coming in. So this is a polyp. It's a photograph of a polyp. And inside that polyp, you'll see that colored materials. Now remember, polyps are an animal, but that colored, they look sort of orangish inside the polyp. That is a very tiny plant with a very long name. And that's called zooxanthellae. Kind of like that word, zooxanthellae. Why don't you all say it out loud? You can say it out loud to the screen. Zooxanthellae. So I like to think of the polyps and the zooxanthellae as having a very special relationship. It's almost like they're best friends. The animal polyp gives the zooxanthellae a home. That zooxanthellae plant actually lives right inside of the polyp. And the zooxanthellae gives the polyp its color. See that orange color there? And it also gives the polyp food. Zooxanthellae is a plant, remember, and that means it can get its food, make food from sunlight. That's photosynthesis, but it makes extra food and it has enough food to share with its best friend, the polyp. So between the two, they have a really good relationship. The polyp gets color and food, the zooxanthellae gets a home. All is good, except there's one issue, and that is zooxanthellae is actually quite picky. It really is picky about water conditions. It needs water that is not too hot and not too cold. It needs very clear water, and usually it needs shallow water. This really makes me think, though, What happens if the water gets too warm? So I challenge you all to make a prediction. What do you think happens to that coral if the water gets too warm? We have another poll for you. Go ahead and enter. There should be directions on the side of your slide. You can enter what you think happens to coral if the ocean water gets too warm. So it turns out I have a really tiny model here in my own home. It's about this size, a really, really, really small model of a coral reef. And remember, you made a prediction. Predictions don't have to be right, but we can actually test your prediction using this small model. So I am going to go ahead and change my camera so that you can take a look at this small model. And we will test your predictions. Okay, so there, looks like we have some coral. It's a model of coral in a model ocean. And it looks pretty colorful to me. So I think that zooxanthellae is living happily with the coral polyp. Looks like the zooxanthellae is giving the polyp its color and its food, and the coral is thriving. But what do you think happens? What would that coral look like if the water got too warm? Well, we can do that experiment. So I am going to replace this water, this ocean model that must be the right temperature because the coral seems to be thriving. I'm going to replace that with a model ocean that is just too warm. So here's the model ocean that is just too warm. And I am going to take that colorful coral and see what happens to it when we put it into the ocean that is just too warm. Now remember, this is a model. This is a model of coral. We would never, it's not real coral. We would never want to hurt coral. We're all about protecting it. But remember your prediction now, and let's see, we're gonna test it. What happens to that coral? Whoa. What did you notice? And why do you think that happened? So take a moment. We'll give you maybe 30 seconds or so. Take a moment to turn and talk to your neighbor. What happened and why do you think that happened? Okay, let's have everybody come back in 3, 2, 1. So this coral certainly looks white. It looks like it has no color. This is actually what we mean when we say coral bleaching. And what happened was that zooxanthellae that we learned was kind of picky about water temperature. That zooxanthellae coral polyp special relationship got really, really stressed and they separated. They parted ways. And so the polyp is left without its zooxanthellae friend. It no longer gets the color that the zooxanthellae gave it. And it, even more importantly, no longer has the food that the zooxanthellae shared with it. So this coral is pale and it's hungry. It's sick. But the good news is it's not actually dead, at least not yet. And so this is happening in the real world, and oceans are getting warm, as I'm sure many of you have heard in the real world. But I think what we want to think about is, why are the oceans getting warmer? So I'm going to go back to my regular camera. And let's think about that a little bit more. Why are oceans getting warmer in the real world? So it's all because of something called carbon dioxide. Everybody breathe in and breathe out. You're breathing out carbon dioxide, right? All animals breathe out carbon dioxide, and plants take it in. Thank you, plants. And anything that's left over forms something like a thin blanket around the earth that keeps the whole earth not too hot, not too warm, but very comfortable. So that's the way the system works in a regular way, in a natural way. Unfortunately, we humans are actually releasing more carbon dioxide lately than is normal. And it becomes a problem because that extra carbon dioxide that we are giving off into the atmosphere is sort of like thickening that blanket that wraps around the earth. And so that carbon dioxide thick blanket makes the earth too warm. You know, just like if you have too warm a blanket on in the summer, the earth gets too warm and then the oceans also get too warm. And this extra carbon dioxide comes from things that we humans are doing when we burn fuel for energy and to get power. So the good news is that since that extra carbon dioxide is coming from humans, it's we humans that can actually do something about it. And the other good news is we can all do something. We don't have to wait for some president or some politician to figure this out for us. We can all do things to help, every one of us. So I'm challenging you all to think about what we can do to help. So to help us think about that, I have a few diagrams here. The extra carbon dioxide that we give off comes from factories that make things that we all want to buy. It comes from cars that takes us places we want to go. And it comes from making the electricity that power the things we want in our homes. So when you think about that, what can each one of us do in our own homes, in our schools, our neighborhoods, to change the way we use power? What can young people do? And remember that thinking about collaboration and how many voices could help coral better than just one. Well, if we work with our friends or schoolmates together, we could make an even bigger impact. So I'd like you to go ahead and think about that a bit. Think about things that you can do, maybe with your friends and family, to help the situation, to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that you are releasing into the air. Go ahead and turn and talk to your neighbor for a moment about what you might be able to do. And we also have, you can also enter your ideas because we'd love to hear from you. What can we do to help coral? Let me give you a moment to think about that. So let's have everybody come back in 3, 2, 1. So I was thinking a little bit about what I would do, and something pretty clear came to mind for me, and that is I'm planning to use my bicycle more. My sister lives not too far from me. I usually drive there. I don't need to drive there. I have a perfectly good bicycle. So I'm going to start bicycling there. And we're going to do things together. So she's going to bicycle to my house when she comes and visits. So we have more of us. We're going to have a bigger impact. And I just wanted to think a little bit more. Remember, we left that coral. In that hot ocean. So I'm going to go back and think about what will happen to that coral if we do some of these things we are thinking about. What would happen if we do actually act on some of the things we're thinking about? I'm going to go back to that camera, and remember, there that coral is in that hot ocean. If we do some of these things, let's see what happens. I'm going to take away that hot ocean, and I'm going to bring back that coral, that ocean that's in the right temperature for coral, that's not too hot and not too cold. And let's see what happens if we put the bleached coral, if we do some of those things, if we act, what will happen? Yes, okay. So if we do some of those things, it's not too late. The zooxanthellae can come back. The ocean temperatures can return to normal. And you can see we have a thriving coral reef. So thank you all. And we would love to hear some of your ideas for how you could help coral. And also, if you have any questions, we're very happy to answer those at this time as well. I see, Jamie, I see you there.
I've seen some amazing responses to the polls and also some great questions coming through, Susan. Thank you so much for that talk. I think the results from that last poll are just coming through, but we've had some really nice responses to collaboration and the importance of taking action on a local basis, like here in Curacao, where there is now 30% of the waters around Curacao are no-take zones, which means that fishing has been banned. And then really great to maybe think about some of those things that young people can do if they live very far from the reef. So it's been a really wonderful talk. Susan, if it's okay, I can see you on the monitor there. Let's just, while we wait for those results to come in, just to ask you some questions. The first question is from Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca. And the question is, can you touch coral?
Well, I think, yes, you can touch coral. It's not a good idea necessarily because they are animals and we want to be careful about not hurting animals. So it's preferable not to touch coral. Good question, Rebecca.
You also might get a little bit stung, Rebecca, if by accident you brush a bit of coral. There's an amazing question here from year 3 at Oakwood Academy. Hi, everyone at Oakwood. And it is, how are coral reefs made?
Very good question. So the coral themselves make those coral reefs. Remember, we saw how those how the coral polyp made its own skeleton? Well, many polyps together next to each other make the skeletons, and that eventually merges into a coral reef, which includes many different types of coral.
Fantastic. Susan, what I love about how corals grow as well is that they make copies of themselves. So for everyone watching, you just have to imagine that Susan makes another Susan, and then there's thousands of Susans all together making up the reef. So it's a copying bonanza, which I find very interesting. Sorry. Anna has got an amazing question. Anna's from AXA Primary. Anna, this is great. Can people who aren't coral scientists help coral reefs? And if so, how?
Oh, Anna, good question. So one way is like we were thinking about a little bit today. So if we work to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that we put out into the air, like if you bicycled to school, you would be helping coral reefs. if you walk to school instead of driving, because you're using less, you're putting out less carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide is what warms the oceans and then causes coral reefs to bleach. Good question.
And some of the poll ideas that came through, we have ride a bike or walk instead of a car. So that's just what Susan's just been saying. Stop buying cars, eat less meat. Of course, different foods have different levels of carbon requirements or carbon emissions. And with a plant-based diet being the least amount of carbon emissions. So moving to a plant-based diet as well. We have a great question here, which is which animals live around the coral reef?
So I'm thinking back to that video we saw at the beginning, and I saw a lot of fish, right? There's definitely lots of fish. There are, remember we saw the sponges will also live there. There are lots and lots of animals that use that coral reefs for their habitat, for their homes.
Susan, brilliant. Just to say that the time for this lesson has come to an end, very sadly, but we have 6 more questions that have popped up for me here. I know some classes may have to leave now and can watch on catch up this final question session. But Susan, do you have a few more moments to answer some more questions with us?
I do. I would love to stay and answer some more questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We have Amber. Hi, Amber, who would like to know what is the healthiest coral reef and why?
What is the healthiest coral reef? Jamie, I don't know. That's a tough one. Do you know where would be
we find sort of the healthier coral reefs on the planet further away from humans. So a reef around an island like Palau in the Pacific has less human impact that has affected it. And also where we find in the Coral Triangle, in areas like Indonesia and around the Philippines, that's where coral reefs sort of came from about, the last sort of great spreading of coral reefs about 10,000 years ago. Because there's so many different types of life in that area, they are better able to deal with more stresses, where you have more diversity in an ecosystem. And last is we have found, or scientists have found, in the Red Sea, they're finding that some of the coral species there are better able to stand up to some of the warming events that are starting to harm other reef systems around the world. But it's a really interesting question, and we could do a whole lesson probably on it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Lovely question here is, Susan, does coral move?
Coral can move, and that's what scientist Pim was studying, right? We saw some coral fighting each other. Yeah, they can move. They don't always move very fast, though.
Moving very fast. So very, very slowly. Great question here is, how long do corals live for? And how long does it take for the zooxanthellae to come back? You talked about them, and you showed that great demonstration of them on leaving and then coming back. What's the kind of timing for that in the sort of natural environment?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. The demonstration is faster than it would happen in real life, particularly with the zooxanthellae coming back. For one thing, it takes quite a while for the ocean temperature to actually change. The zooxanthellae on an individual coral can will actually leave pretty quickly. Like once it gets to a certain temperature, that zooxanthellae is gone, and a particular coral can bleach very quickly. But it can take, it depends on how under the system. It can take days, it can take months. And unfortunately, if the temperature stays too warm for too long, the coral will eventually die.
thank you, Susan, for that sort of clarification and explanation. Just on that first bit of the question, how long do corals live for?
So we actually asked that of some of our scientists recently, and apparently it's a very difficult question to answer. So I'm going to forward that. Do you know, Jamie? So it's not as easy as one would think, apparently.
So I think one of the things, I mean, over 1,000 years, potentially for some of the corals we're talking about here, when we've been talking about the shallow tropical corals, you also get corals in the deep ocean, different types of corals. And there's an estimate that they could live up to 4, even 5,000 years. So as Susan said, it's still an area of study, but incredibly, they could be some of the oldest living things on our planet, or oldest living animals on our planet, which I find fascinating. We have, from year 4, Oakwood Primary Academy, how many different types of coral are there?
Thousands, I know. I'm not sure. I think there's, thousands.
Really depends on where you are. So somewhere like Curacao, we only have about 65, 70 species of hard coral. You go somewhere like the Great Barrier Reef, you've got about 350 species of coral. So it really depends on where you are. Coral reefs are very different in different places. Really great question from Oakwood. Beechwood Primary Academy, year 3, really interesting question. Can coral die if things get stuck to them? And I know there's a big issue around plastic in the ocean. Susan, what happens when things get stuck to coral?
Yeah, they're going to die. It's very hard for the coral polyps to get their food. For example, if their things are stuck to them, sometimes they get overgrown by algae, and that's also that's a big problem as well.
So another thing, thinking about your plastic habits as well, because plastic in the ocean affecting a wide range of life in the ocean. And the last question we have is, does coral dying affect other animals?
Oh yeah, that's the thing about everything that lives on this earth, right? One thing dying affects so many other animals and plants. So if coral reefs die, maybe some of those fish lose their homes, for example. Maybe some of the coral is food for other animals, and if it's dead, those animals won't get their food. So absolutely, lots and lots of impact where you least expect it. It even impacts humans, right? Lots of humans depend on coral reef habitat for, say, fishing. Corals can help humans as well.
Yeah, I think about 1 billion people across the world connected to the health of the reef, directly connected to the health of the reef. Susan, thank you so much again for your wonderful presentation, the journey through how we can help coral reefs. Thank you to all those classes watching. You've been amazing. The level of your questions continues to amaze me. They're really, really brilliant. And thank you again. It's very sadly, we're about to have a tropical storm here in Curacao, so we're going to cover up quickly. Thank you, and Susan, thanks again. And it's goodbye for now from AXA Coral Live.
Bye, everybody.